And now I'd like to introduce Claire Feniuk from the Conservation Ecology Centre to speak about the Resilient Forests project.
Hi everyone, my name's Claire Feniuk. As Jack said, I'm from the Conservation Ecology Centre and I am very daunted to be speaking straight after Michael Sean Fletcher. He does very fancy and awesome science with lots of graphs. I'm going to stop fangirling and dive in. So you've just heard how the Otways heathlands have been shaped by 50,000 years of, where's it gone? 50,000 years of fire, and how EMAC's biocultural vision is guiding their future. So I'm going to shift us now to think about the foothill forests of the Otways, where many of these same lessons apply. These forests aren't static, they've been cared for thousands of generations, and their future depends on how we choose to care for them now. So through the Resilient Forest Project, which we're delivering in partnership with DECA and EMAC, we're bringing together Western science, traditional owner knowledge, and community perspectives to ask, what does a healthy forest look like, and how do we care for it in a future shaped by climate change? This project takes place on the lands of the Gadabanad, Gulajan, and Keri-Warang people of the Maar Nation. Their sovereignty was never ceded, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and to all traditional owners here today. Recognition and respect for traditional owner knowledge and obligations to country really sits at the heart of the Resilient Forest Project. It's all about working side by side with one foot on country to care for these forests together. So this project began as a 12-month pilot in 2023, exploring the ways that climate-smart forest management, exploring what climate-smart forest management might look like in the foothill forests of the Otways. Why are we working here? Well, these forests are important in their own right, but they also buffer and protect the wet forests of the Otways, which are especially vulnerable to repeat hot fires. So building resilience in the foothills is one of the best ways that we can safeguard those wetter systems. And with 20 years since logging ended here in the Otways, this is a perfect moment to learn lessons from post-logging transition and share them with other regions that are now facing that same shift. So there are three parts to this story. First, for the ecologists in the room, I'll talk about the foothill forests themselves and the influences that shape them. Then, for the strategic planners out there, I see some of you, we're going to talk about adaptation pathways, which is a tool to help decision-making in an uncertain future. And finally, for the radicals amongst you, I'll talk about how this project is really about changing the system of how we make forest management decisions now. So let's get stuck in. So first I'll give you the big picture and then I'll jump into some detail. So with this project, like all good scientists, we began with a literature review, but once we saw the gaps in the published evidence, we really expanded that into a broader knowledge review, bringing in grey literature, monitoring data, and expert insights. And then in phase 2 of the project, we added a rapid risk assessment for climate vulnerable biodiversity. And that relied on literature plus a process called expert elicitation, which is really just a fancy way of saying we asked some very smart people what they think. Some of you are in the room. And from this, we built a picture of the current state of foothill forests, what's most at risk, and some of the management options, and importantly, a long list of all the things that we don't know. That work has helped shape a research and monitoring plan, and we've now started on-ground research to begin filling those gaps. So now for some detail. So the current state of these foothill forests is a bit of a mixed picture. On the one hand, foothill forests are inherently disturbance-prone systems, and they naturally select for fire-tolerant species. Their varied topography and rainfall underpin landscape scale diversity that really adds to that resilience. But two factors dominate their condition today. First, the legacy of logging. So in many places, these forests are overstocked, they're oversimplified, and they're lacking key features like large, old, hollow-bearing trees that provide really crucial habitat for many species. Secondly, prescribed burning. So large-scale burns, often at 10 to 20-year intervals, meaning that they burn hot, are really good at reducing fuels in the short term, there's no question. But evidence suggests that they're driving a cycle of understory shrub dominance, which may actually increase long-term fire risk. So yes, resilience exists in parts of the system, but post-colonization management has profoundly shaped how these forests look and function today. So that's the current condition. Now let's layer on climate change. So in general terms, climate models suggest that we should expect hotter, drier, and more extreme conditions into the future. And that could translate to a range of interacting threats to biodiversity, including changing fire regimes, habitat fragmentation, or wholesale transition of habitats, shifting hydrology and water balance, soil degradation, and the spread of pests and disease. And it's no surprise which elements of the system end up being the most vulnerable. It's the wet gullies, the large habitat trees, the interface between the foothill forests and the wet forests, fire-sensitive and range-restricted species, and potentially the soil fungi and microbiota that underpin how this ecosystem functions and that we really don't have a good understanding of. So that gives us a snapshot of the risks, but the big question is, what do we actually do about it? So ending logging was a huge and vital step in protecting these forests, but it's not the end of the story. With the chainsaws gone, the debate has shifted to what, if anything, we should do now to actively manage them. So this is a new frontier in the so-called forest wars, where one side argues that we should let forests recover on their own, and the other argues that the legacies of colonization and the pressures of climate change mean that they need active care now more than ever. So our approach in navigating this debate has been to look to the evidence and where it's missing, to do the work, to test options, gather data, and let that guide us. And there are lots of gaps. Much of the science that's fueling this debate, and particularly the arguments against active management, comes from very different forest systems. So we need evidence from places like the Otways to understand what these foothill forests really need here. So with that in mind, we put together a research and monitoring plan focused on two key levers that need testing in this system. Firstly, ecological thinning, to address that legacy of logging. And secondly, low intensity, high frequency fire with the aim of promoting biodiversity and managing fuel loads. We're not presenting those as silver bullets. There are valid questions and concerns about both. And that's exactly why we're designing research to test them properly, to start answering those questions with evidence. We're building a trial site network to explore these management options, and we're scoping out establishing a long-term fit-for-purpose management trial here in the Otways. So at the Northern Ramps, which Jack mentioned earlier, it's number 1 on the map up there, we're working with Uni of Melbourne on a research trial focused on low-intensity, high-frequency fire, asking whether it can support floristic diversity and reduce fuel loads as an alternative to conventional planned burning in some parts of the landscape. With the help of Emacs Guardians, we surveyed sites here last spring, and analysis of that data is currently underway, so watch this space. Scoping surveys have also been done at 2 more sites across the Otways, at Centre Road as part of the Healthy Country trial, which will ultimately combine ecological thinning and mosaic burning, and Jancourt, where we're looking to explore the long-term outcomes of historic silvicultural thinning up there, again with the University of Melbourne. That's just a bit of a snapshot of what we're learning about the forests themselves, their history, their vulnerabilities, and some of those options that we're beginning to test on the ground now. And it's also a teaser for next year's forum, where hopefully we'll be able to share some results with you. The next part of the story is about how we plan for change, and that's where the strategic planning frameworks bit comes in. But don't worry, I will keep it short, and there are lots of photos. So going back to the very beginning, this pilot set out to test a framework called adaptation pathways to see if we could use it, to see if it would be useful for climate adaptation planning in complex systems like forests. Now, there's lots of these sorts of planning tools out there. Some of you might know the RAD framework. I know that gets used a lot by parks. I personally don't have a favorite because I'm obviously very cool, but here's what adaptation pathways has going on that's pretty valuable. It's flexible and adaptive, so it recognizes that we won't get everything right first time. It lays out multiple pathways, so we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. It's collaborative, so it lets us bring different perspectives into the planning process. And it's practical. It helps us identify barriers and enablers and the triggers and thresholds that tell us that we need to change course. So going back to the beginning, we gave it a crack, and we didn't do it alone. Through this project, we've established the Otways Resilient Forest Network, which includes many wonderful individuals and organisations in the room. So spot your logos. With that group, we've run 6 workshops over the past 2 years, focused on learning together with the aim of building adaptation pathways for the foothill forests. At every workshop, we've walked on country and explored different perspectives and different aspects of forest management. And once we even remembered to wear PPE, and there is a photo to prove it. We sat in circles in various community halls across the Otways. We mapped out our understanding of foothills forests on numerous very large pieces of paper. And yes, of course, there were lots of post-it notes. So did we build a detailed adaptation plan that looks like this? Well, not quite. But we did sketch out a rough map of where we think things are going. And honestly, I think we built something even more important. We built a network of people who live and work in the Otways and all wear multiple hats with shared understanding of what's shaping these forests. and a shared commitment to find better ways for caring for them. So it's the antidote to forest wars. Along the way, we've learned a few things. We've learned that we need to be flexible. Pathways is a toolkit, not a prescription. So you have to design a process that's fit for the context and meets people where they are. We've learned that trust matters. This process relied on non-government organisations like the CEC and our academic partners and our wonderful facilitator, Jeff Brown, to ensure accountability. But what really unlocked it was lots of individuals, and particularly those wearing government agency logos, showing up, being honest, being transparent, and not just towing the party line. That was really the key for this process. We learned that inclusion matters. Climate adaptation is a team sport, particularly when we're talking about complex socio-ecological systems like forests. If you don't bring people into the process and make space for diverse voices, then the risk is that your plan will fail. And we learned that collaborative planning takes time because it's about building relationships and sharing knowledge. You can't rush this stuff. It's the process that matters. In workshops, out on country, over lunch and lots of cups of tea, and even through the occasional game of rock, paper, scissors. So now finally, we're on to the radical stuff. In our very first Resilient Forest workshop, we agreed on a shared endeavour. We can do better for these forests. And we sketched out a vision for the future, forests that are managed in ways that are place-based, shaped by people who know and understand the different values of each patch, and grounded in traditional owner obligations to country. At its heart, that's a biocultural approach to forest management. It builds on the work on ground parrot country and at Dreeite, and it's actually really quite radical compared to the way that forests are currently managed. So then the real challenge that this pilot has set in motion is how do we change the system to allow that kind of nuanced place-based forest management to happen? How do we connect bottom-up approaches grounded on country with top-down structures that currently drive forest policy, management, and monitoring? I don't have any of the answers to that, but we're thinking about it and we're talking about it. And over the next 12 months, we're going to be doing a lot of hard work together to demonstrate what it could look like through the Centre Road Healthy Country trial. That's another teaser, and I am just about out of time. But you can find out more about the project on the brand new Resilient Forest Network website. There's a QR code up in the corner. Thanks to Tony for all the tech support with that. Thank you to all of you in the room who've been part of the process, and to everyone here today for listening.